If they're not interested, they're not going to get there. The reason we have so many ADHD entrepreneurs is because they follow their dreams where they want to take them, whether it's money or not money. Money can come along, but they're not doing it for the money. I know ADHD people who, the minute the business is successful, they sell it and start another business because they're bored. It's running itself. It doesn't need any challenge anymore. So, it's the love of learning, the love of the challenge of always being challenged in something you enjoy.
ADHD Rewired, episode 382. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter. You can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups, and you can learn all about our intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. You can do all of this at our website, ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to the episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Judy Bass, like the fish, not the guitar. I love that, by the way. That was very helpful. Judith is an internationally recognized expert in the field of college planning for students with ADHD and other learning challenges. Over the past 20 years, Judy has helped many adults with ADHD in their late 20s and even in their 30s realize their dream of earning a college degree. By focusing on their strengths and not their challenges, Judy helps adults with ADHD develop a positive self-image, giving them the confidence to achieve success in life. Judy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it is a pleasure. I'm looking forward to this because I know that there are a lot of people right now, whether they are getting ready to go back to school or are getting ready to have another possibly virtual semester. Hopefully most people, by the time we're listening to this, hopefully we're going to be back on campus.
Hopefully.
So, I just have to ask, it's probably been a really interesting year for you based on everything with COVID.
Yes, it has. We've completely changed our way of working with students, of course, and we're doing everything online at the moment, hoping to go back in person. But it has created some challenges, but it's also helped some students do better.
Yes, I was curious about that because I know over the last almost 2 years now, education has been this huge forced experiment on all levels, right? So I'm curious to know what kinds of things have you been discovering for students, for college students, during this time that has actually been kind of a pleasant surprise or been really sort of interesting to see?
Well, the first is that for students with ADHD, many of them have enjoyed being online better than the classroom. Some have told me there are fewer distractions. Others have said they can get up and walk around when they need to. They have breaks that are different than just 5 minutes between classes or a couple of hours, of work with a break. And so they're finding that they like the hybrid approach. Some students are thinking of continuing to take a college course online next semester, even if they do have in person.
So let's back up a little bit. How did you get into this line of work?
Well, I was a teacher for many years. But to go back even further, my brother was diagnosed with ADHD back in the 60s as it was called minimal brain dysfunction.
That's a fun one.
Oh, yeah. And my mother fortunately didn't buy it. So she did her own research. And I grew up in a household watching my mother advocate for my brother with ADHD all those years before there were any laws in place. And so I grew up watching it unfold and became a tutor and then a teacher that I did for years. And then finally, when my daughters were getting ready for college about 21 years ago, maybe a little longer, I realized that for my second daughter, who has ADHD, nobody had any answers for me. And so when I started researching, I said, there's no way parents can do this by themselves. And so I started looking around and found out there's an actual profession of college counseling. And that's what I've been doing since.
So for a lot of my longtime listeners, they know that I discovered that I had ADHD when I was in college after I almost failed out of college. That was the thing that, after a semester of partying, getting really bad grades, and then with the threat of being pulled out of school, I actually started studying and did worse. That was the catalyst for me. Are you finding that a lot of students that you're working with, do they already have a diagnosis of ADHD?
Most of the ones that I'm working with already have the diagnosis because that's why they come to me in the first place, because I only work with students who are neurodiverse.
And, one of the things I think is so critical is the self-advocacy piece, the piece of asking for help. How do you help students and what do you recommend to students who are in college or going to college, and how would they advocate for what they need?
Well, it's a process and students need to really start early. Parents really need to start early, allowing their students to have a voice. And I tell them that when they get to college, as long as they have a good advocate in the learning center, that person can help them learn how to advocate. Every student who applies or requests accommodation gets an accommodations letter that they need to take to their professor. And what I tell them is this is a golden opportunity that not everybody has. You have a reason for talking to your professor. So you can go in there and say, I'm really interested in your class. I think I'm going to do really well. Here are some of my challenges that I'm hoping you can help me with. And it turns it around. So the student's not feeling like they're asking for something they don't deserve. They're saying, I want to do well in your class. I need some help. If they can't do it, they can role play with the learning specialists who'd be more than happy to help them figure out how to talk to their professors. And that's basically a learning experience.
What do you tell the students who say, I don't want the professor to think I'm different or, treat me differently? Because I'm sure you hear that.
Yes. When I work with students, I work on a lot of that before they even get to the college. So we do a lot of self-advocacy work and talking about being positive and seeing yourself in a much more positive life. It's more of a strengths-based approach to showing them this is what you're good at. This is what you want to focus on. And that actually helps them deal with challenges better when they see themselves in a positive light. So we talk about the fact that not every professor is going to accept that you have ADHD. They might roll their eyes every time you ask for extra time, but you have to be persistent and know that sometimes professors don't understand what ADHD is, and you can educate them. So I just try to keep it as positive as possible.
What do you tell a student who does experience that and kind of just feels real discouraged, especially if they are kind of new to self-advocacy?
Mm-hmm. Well, as I said, if they can go to their learning specialist and ask for help, if it's a school that has really good support, then that learning specialist can call that professor and let the professor know that there's a law that he needs to follow. And if he's not following it, it's against the law.
Right. And probably we want to sort of, that's the last approach, that when everything else doesn't work.
Exactly.
Because, one of the challenging things is sort of using the law that is that does protect students with ADHD or even workers with ADHD, the ADA. Like once that sort of is on the table, even though you're protected, there is a sort of this contrarian relationship. And so I find it really tricky because I think that, and I have heard this for some students, that's how they start. They're like, I have the right for this. And it just kind of creates a poor relationship because it's like, oh, wait, what?
Well, that's why I say that their golden opportunity is to talk to the professor and bring the professor in as a partner and say, I need this assistance from you. And if you can help me be successful in your class, I want, to know what you want. And I want to know what I can do to be successful in your class, but I need your help. So for example, if I am distracted and you can come by and just bang on the desk next to me, that will help me. So it's not saying I deserve something.
I know when I was in college, I always made sure I had a front row seat for all of my classes.
Right.
It's just because in a sense, it's simple math. If you're easily distracted, decrease the number of things that are in your line of sight, right? That you can be distracted by. Right?
That's right.
Way too easy if you're in the back to be distracted by everything and get involved in stuff that has nothing to do with the class.
Well, and that brings up a good point too, because the other part is to be in a more discussion-based class than a lecture hall. Because in a lecture hall, you're going to be thinking about everything else but the teacher. But in a discussion class, you're engaged. And that's what helps you learn better when there's involvement. Do
you encourage your students to get onto Rate My Professor? Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Because I think, in a kind of a blanket approach, the lecture style can be really tough. Unless you have a really awesome professor who there were two professors that I could think of in my college experience. One was in my undergrad, the other was in grad school. And they kind of both had similar temperaments. The first one comes in right off his Harley, coming in, kind of shouting about how the police were hassling him because they didn't know what he was doing on campus. And he's the head of psychiatry in the hospital where I went to down at school. And so it was a psychology class, and he was just very kind of entertaining and very just didn't sort of fit the mold of what you would think of as a college professor. Right. And I loved it. And I had another one in grad school. And kind of similar thing. It's almost like every other word was an F-bomb. And it was a 7 to 10 p.m. class. And it was just oh my God, thank God for this guy. Cause it was wonderful. So I think trying to find out who is actually teaching the classes, cause so much of ADHD is based on interest.
Exactly.
Boring is awful. Interesting is wonderful. So really trying to find
that's exactly right. Finding the professor that matches for your learning style. And aside from Rate My Professor, which is definitely a good way to go, I find that once students are on campus for a semester, the word of mouth can take care of a lot of that too. So students can say, I know that, my son was in a class that was multiple choice, and he does not do well with multiple choice. He'd rather write essays. That's just him. So he dropped the class and found out there was another professor. So he picked it up the next semester to write the essays instead. So you can find those things out on campus, and also the ratings of the professors, of course, make a difference.
What do you suggest as far as, people who maybe they have their bachelor's degree and are thinking about going back to school for an advanced degree? Because I know a lot of people with ADHD, they sort of hem and haw about it. And because it's hard. It is. I remember learning, I think it was at a CHAD conference maybe 8-9 years ago, hearing that of professionals with master's degrees who have ADHD, only about 1% of people with ADHD actually go on to get a master's degree. And I just remember that brought tears to my eyes. It was oh my God.
Well, it's an interesting point, because I find that people with ADHD know a lot more than people with degrees, because they love learning for the sake of learning. And so I know many people who don't even have their bachelor's degrees who are so knowledgeable in their field because they're self-taught. So that may be one reason why they don't go on, because their interest is learning, not necessarily the degree.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I work with a lot of students who are just going for their bachelor's degree in their late 20s, early 30s, because they had a bad experience, similar to what you had talked about. As a freshman in college, going maybe to community college, they couldn't do it, and they didn't know why. They thought they weren't college material. And then maybe 10 years later, they're like, you know what? I am smart. I can do this. And so I've had a lot of students come at that age, and that's actually a better time for kids with ADHD or young adults with ADHD, because their brain is more mature and they're ready for it.
Yeah, giving the brain the chance to continue developing.
Exactly. And I would say that from what I know, People with ADHD if they're going to go back to school, it's not going to be right away. If they're going to go for their master's, it's going to be after a few years because they need that time, to work and to be away from learning. But again, it depends on the school and the amount of learning.
One thing that I wish that I knew about when I did my undergrad was that there are colleges that, I forget what it's called, but where it's basically one class every 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So if a student, because for me, my biggest challenge is always like multi-tracking, right? It's like having multiple projects that I got to kind of, shift from. So if I was able to just have a 6-week period, just focus on, a particular subject, I probably would have done so much better. What is that, and what can people look for if they think that would appeal to them?
Well, there are 2 colleges in the country, to my knowledge, Colorado College and Cornell College in Iowa, that have that. And it's a blessing and a curse. If you love the subject, it's a wonderful way to learn. If you're not interested in the subject, it can be a miserable 6 weeks. And so what happens is some students do really well with it if they can do the courses they're not interested in. Another option besides that is to do a quarter system, which is actually more like a trimester. And colleges that have that, you're taking 3 classes for a trimester and instead of 4 or 5. And that seems to be a good balance between the 2 because you can take 2 classes you like and 1 you don't like. And then you can at least balance out what you're doing. And there are a lot of colleges that are project-based and experiential. Mm. And those are much better for students with ADHD, much more active learning and internships.
So let's take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to talk more about what kind of workload and the different types of learning environments that adult students with ADHD may find success in. So we will be right back. Did you hear that Adult Study Hall membership community is officially open? If you're not sure what I'm talking about, then head on over to adultstudyhall.com. There's just something about working with other people who just get it that makes it so much easier to get started on the things we don't really want to do. Access to the Adult Study Hall membership community is only $19.99 a month. If you like working to the rhythm of your own tunes, membership includes access to Adult Study Hall 24/7 or ASH 24/7, a Zoom room that is open all hours of the day and night, even weekends. Every day of the week, one of our ADHD reWired coaching alumni members hosts an hour or 2 of time in ASH 24/7, so you can guarantee you won't be working alone. Also included are our guided and facilitated sessions, which we call ASH Plus. If you have a task or 5 on your list that make you go, I don't want to do that, then you can join Task Busters every Thursday to get you started. Do you have a laundry basket or 5 to put away? Or maybe even meaning to load the dishwasher, but the clothes keep piling on the chair in the bedroom that was actually meant for reading? Get ready to drudge through your mountain of clutter by joining the clean and decluttering sessions on Saturdays. And if you need a kick in the accountability pants to work on your resume, update your LinkedIn profile, or do anything else career or work related, because we know sometimes that's just boring, and you can join CASH. That's CASH, a session focused on forwarding your career. All of our ASH Plus sessions are facilitated by more of our awesome members of the ADHD reWired alumni coaching community with check-ins and progress reports during each session. For only $19.99 a month, you'll have access to ASH 24/7 and all our current and upcoming ASH sessions. This community is for you and for everyone with ADHD who want to work a little different. And like I say at the start of the show, you are not alone. You can join us by going to adultstudyhall.com. That's adultstudyhall.com. I hope to meet you there. Support for ADHD reWired comes from our coaching community, which includes our growing alumni membership community. Our alumni members have all gone through our intensive online coaching and accountability groups and know that the support we all need doesn't stop after 10 weeks. And to all of our alumni out there, starting Tuesday, July 6th, we're adding an additional time for our weekly planning sessions. Join coaches Moira Mabin and Roxy Martin every Tuesday from 4 to 5:15 p.m. Pacific, that's 7 to 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time, or join me at my usual time, 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern. If you're an ARC alumni wanting to come back to join our membership community, send an email to support@ADHDrewired.com and add the subject line, Rejoining Alumni. We have so many incredible things happening in our community. So if it's been a while, or if you're an alumni from way back when, before we had an alumni community, we'd love to have you back. Season 25 of our coaching groups, our summer sessions, start next week. All 4 sections are now officially full. To find out how to get on our wait list, go to coachingrewired.com. So whether you want to discover how you can make accountability your friend, or decrease time blindness, or learn how to use your calendar to prioritize what really matters to you, or learn how to set more ADHD-friendly goals, get your name added to our fall interest list by going to coachingrewired.com. If you're in the Americas, click on the orange button at the top of the page. And if you're outside the Americas, say in Europe or Australia, then click on the blue button to get your name added to our fall interest list. Learn more about our award-winning intensive online coaching and accountability groups by going to coachingrewired.com. That's coachingrewired.com. All right, we are back. So right before the break, we were talking about kind of workload, different kind of formats, whether it's semesters, trimesters, project-based learning. What are kind of some more of these different types of learning environments that might be really helpful for students who are either currently in college and are maybe looking for something else or considering going back to college?
Well, there are a lot of alternatives to the traditional college nowadays. There are work colleges, work study colleges, where you are taking classes, but you're also doing either community service work or actual work. And there are colleges that, as I mentioned earlier, are project-based or experiential, where a lot of the work is in a lab or in a studio. Some of it's class time, but most of it's active. And for students with ADHD, I always recommend a reduced course load. If you're taking, if 15 credits is the norm, you should take 12, because you don't realize how much work needs to be done outside the classroom. And it's very difficult to schedule and to structure yourself. So if you're taking 15 credits, that's adding on 3 to 4 hours a week of work time that you don't even realize. So when I say 12 credits, you want to spread it out. You want to have 2 classes a day every day. You know, there's a lot of ways to manage your ADHD. One of my favorite ways is to sort of look at your classes as bookends. Have a morning class and an afternoon class with at least 3 hours in between. That way, school begins and ends with a class, but in the middle, you're still focused in school mode. And make sure you don't have too many classes on one day and no classes on another day, because we all know what happens with an ADHD brain that has nothing to do that day. It's going to go right back to sleep.
Or play video games the whole day.
Or play video games, but not think about the fact that, no, I have 6 hours worth of work to do today.
Plenty of time.
That just doesn't occur.
Right. How much do you see students kind of wrestling with perfectionism?
You know, there are types of ADHD students who are perfectionists and won't hand anything in until it's done. And there are others who are procrastinators who wait till the last minute, hand in whatever they've done, and always get A's. So they're both sides of that coin. I've worked with both. And, you know, it's frustrating to work with the procrastinators who don't have to put any effort in, and they get that A because it doesn't teach them anything.
Right, they're constantly rewarded for waiting to the last minute.
And the person who has that perfectionism, it's very difficult to shake that, because that comes from an insecurity. So teaching them that they are good, that this is a good piece of work, having them have a tutor check it over first to say, wonderful job, it's good enough, hand it in. It's a real challenge. It's a real challenge.
I know for me, my perfectionism was born beginning of my sophomore year after I was diagnosed and started taking medication from ADHD. And for the first time ever, I was getting mostly A's. Right. And it was actually after that first semester where I got a 3.75. I was like, oh, I can do well in school, was when the perfectionism really like it was probably on a 4 to 5 year kind of just like hyperdrive of perfectionism, where it's like I would like sleep. I'll sleep, I'll sleep next decade. Right. Like, and, it's one of these things I wish that I had better sort of self-management strategies. And not just to have the strategy of just keep working harder, longer hours. Cause I was a really, really hard working student in college. And in a lot of ways, it probably, there was lots of social stuff that I kind of think I missed out on. Because I was the one that was like up all night in the library, like just working. Cause I had to, like, I felt like that was what I needed to do to get the grades that I wanted to get. I think the positive piece was I was really interested in what I was doing. So it didn't feel so awful to be doing that. But I think it took a toll, overall on that. And it, really taught me that like that you could only do that for so long. Cause when I was in grad school, I was like doing, day after day after day where I might get 2 hours of sleep a night. And it was like, I was not very healthy at that moment.
Well, that's one of the things about ADHD. It's often black and white thinking, all or nothing. And you found that now I know I'm smart and I can do this. I want to do it all day. And I love what I'm doing. And it's just like a video game. If you love what you're doing, you want to do it all the time.
Yeah.
And the hyperfocus is a big piece of ADHD that a lot of people have, and it can be positive or negative.
Let's talk about I love to for people who are really like, can I go back to college? Or maybe they are in college and just thinking about, all right, maybe I do need to go find the Office of Disability Services. Like, what do I ask for? What kind of accommodations are even feasible?
Well, the first thing you want to do is get a formal diagnosis. If you do have ADHD, you know that. You can walk in with the documentation. If you don't know for sure, you can go in and say, I think I might have ADHD. And some colleges will either do testing or will give you the name of someone to do that. So for accommodations, typically you want to have extended time, not because you need more time, but because you get distracted a lot and your mind wanders. You would prefer to have a distraction reduced setting for the test. Many colleges have that in the learning center. You might want a note taker because you do need to take notes. But if someone in the class can take full notes, most people with ADHD are not able to write and listen together. And you might also want an executive function coach, which means, or an ADHD coach, which means you could have somebody you meet with once or twice a week throughout the semester who helps you manage your time, create your schedules, break up your work, which we call chunking your work, so that you can manage that 300-page book by knowing that you read 20 pages a day and mark that down. That doesn't come naturally. And so those are the main things that I would say you would ask for.
How common is it for places like where you're working to, cause I always remember that that first sort of week when you get your syllabuses for all your classes, like that was such an important sort of setup for the semester where I would literally extract every important piece of information from that syllabus, get it into the calendar, including the professor's office hours, their phone numbers, their like all of those things where I could feel comfortable actually throwing away the syllabus, right? And have everything all in one place. Do you help students do that? And is that something that people, like students can kind of ask for if they're going to seek help for that?
That would be what an ADHD coach could help with, because you definitely want, before you get to the college, you want to connect with the Learning Center or the Disabilities Office. And unfortunately, It's called a Disabilities Office because the law requires it to be a disability. So I just want to say that that's not the preferred term, even among the learning specialists. So you would go and you would ask to meet with someone in the summer and get your accommodations set up. And then when school starts, you've already got an appointment to meet with that person and say, let's go through the syllabi and help me break everything down and put it on my calendar. And that might take 2 or 3 sessions, but you absolutely need to have someone help you with that. That is not something that a student can do by himself or herself.
What about technology? What kind of technology aids can students either request through the college or maybe even purchase on their own?
There are so many out there now. For taking notes, for example, there's a program called Sonaset, and there's also a Smart Pen that people have heard of that's been around for a while. It keeps getting better. The Smart Pen now, you can write with, it records, and now you can upload it and transcribe it onto your computer and save the notes. There are readers. There are all kinds of assistive technology for organizing, for time management. I just discovered a new one, Momentum, that reminds you on your computer main screen what you've written for the day is your main activity. So no matter where you go to a new tab, it first takes you back there and shows you main activity today. Oh, right. I'm supposed to be working on that, not going down a rabbit hole about something else. So there's a lot out there. Most college disabilities offices have access to a lot of those technologies. And if not, there are people in the community, a lot of times speech and language pathologists who do have expertise in technology and help you with setting up technology for yourself.
Judy, what about, kind of going back to, you do need to have that documented diagnosis in order to qualify for services. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I hear is that my university will only give me accommodations if I can go get this, $5,000 neuropsych. And, we've seen the research that says that that's not necessary for the ADHD diagnosis. How do students sort of walk that, those two areas of college saying we need the evaluation, research saying that might not actually be necessary, but they need the accommodation? Like, how do you navigate that?
Well, once you're at college age, it's a little different than when you're in high school. Once you're college age, if you can articulate what the issues are, often you can go to a doctor who can do a reduced set of tests, or just have you fill out one of the forms that is like a checklist of activities that you do. And many, many colleges will now accept that as the diagnosis. Also, a lot of universities do sliding scale testing. So many state universities that have, like a social behavioral science or psychology department or speech and language department, their graduate students, as practice, do neuropsych reports. And so if you can find a university nearby that may not be yours that will do that, that's another great way to get that done. But I would say the best thing is to go to the disabilities office and ask, I believe I have ADHD. I don't know for sure, but here's what I'm struggling with. Can I get accommodations? What do I have to do? And just simply ask.
And do you think that that's where students should start, or should they start at a doctor? Like, what do you think? And
I would start campus? If they're already in college. I would definitely go to the learning specialist to ask for help. Some schools might just say, "Okay, we'll give you extra time since you clearly have ADHD." Other schools will say, "We need the diagnosis." There's a wide range in how students are treated for their accommodations in college. There's so many great colleges that support students with ADHD, and there are some that really leave you to yourself. And you just have to find them, make sure you're in the right one.
Yeah. What if you find that you're not in the right one?
Well, I work with a lot of transfer students because that happens. You can try to make it work, or you can transfer, but you can also look for an outside coach. If you can find an executive function coach that you can either meet with in person or even online and still stay in your college, that's also another option.
I know that, transferring to another college is hard because transitions are hard, but we also need to make a transition right now to take a quick break. And we will be right back. And I want to continue talking about accommodations and how to be successful as a college student. So we will be right back. The ADHD reWired podcast family is about to grow again. So what's next? Coming soon, Will Kerb from Hacking Your ADHD and Coach Roxy Martin will join forces to bring you a brand new show. Wait, what was the question? That's the name of their upcoming show. It's called Wait, What Was the Question? Speaking of questions, you've probably heard me, Brendan, Will, MJ, and Moira on the podcast. And if you were able to hang out with us on our most recent live Q&A that was recorded on June 8th, then you probably heard Roxy too. Roxy is also one of the ADHD reWired coaches. And you can join all of us again and again every second Tuesday of the month for an hour of live Q&A. Our next live Q&A is on Tuesday, July 13th at 12:30 p.m. Central. It's always a lot of fun and sometimes a little silly. And if you're going to join us right at the beginning, you just might get to see how ADHD we can really be. Subscribe to all of our shows: ADHD reWired, ADHD Essentials, Hacking Your ADHD, ADHD Diversified, and the ADHD Friendly Lifestyle by going to ADHDrewired.com and click on the podcast button at the top of the page. And soon enough, we'll be adding, wait, what was the question? We appreciate all of our listeners who support all of our shows. It's because of you that we can keep growing so we can reach more and more friends with ADHD everywhere. We really appreciate all of you. Thanks for listening. Support for ADHD reWired comes from our patrons over at patreon.com/ADHD reWired. If you're a long-time listener, hello. And if you're new to the podcast, welcome. One of the ways that you could show support for this show is by becoming a patron. This week, we have Boy S at the $5 a month level and Linda N at the $10 a month level. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our patrons who continue supporting this podcast each and every month. I posted a poll last week to all of our patrons who give $5 and up, asking you if you're using the ad-free feed. And if not, why not? If you could take a minute to respond to that poll, that would help me better serve you. And it would help me determine if ad-free episodes is something that I should keep doing. Let me know if it's something you want. If you find value in this show, whether you've learned something new about your ADHD, taken away some helpful tips that you've applied to your everyday life, or relate to our guests who share their stories about their ADHD journeys, head on over to ADHDrewired.com/Patreon and become a patron. I am so thankful to all of our patrons who pledge each and every month. If you're unable to support this show right now through Patreon, please don't worry. I'm just glad that you are here each and every week. But if becoming a patron is the way that you would like to show your support, great. Head on over to ADHDrewired.com/Patreon, where you can find all the different perks at each level. I might even have some new Patreon exclusive content coming your way. So current and future patrons, keep an eye out. Learn more and support the show by going to ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. And thank you so much. All right, we are back with Judy Bass. So one of the things that I found doing my sort of time in higher education is the best accommodations for me were the informal ones. And I think that I can sum up that accommodation in one word, and that's relationship. It's a relationship with the professors. Because the thing that, a lot of students are often like afraid to go ask for help. They're afraid to disclose. But what, from my experience, has been professors are really actually excited to work with students who are eager about learning.
Yes.
And I'm going to tell you, I can't tell you how many papers I was able to renegotiate, not even just the terms of the paper, but the entire topic of the paper to make it more interesting to something I was interested in. And I never was told no when I presented an idea for, hey, can I research this or, present it this way? I think I even was able to not do a paper once to give a presentation, right? Cause I could do presentations. Like that's a strength of mine. Like writing papers is a struggle of mine, right? So really developing that relationship is not just a great skill to develop because especially in college, I think it's so much safer to practice these skills in college than it is in the workplace.
Yes.
Right? Where you can get fired,
sure.
Right? You can't get fired at college, right? You can fail out of college, but you can't get fired at college, right? And I think the thing to really keep in mind, this is from my experience, is that there were definitely times where I got B's that should have been C's and A's that should have been B's. And the only reason I think I got that bump was because my professors knew that I was working hard and I developed a relationship with them.
Exactly. Yeah. And as I said earlier, one of the keys is you have an opportunity to get to know your professors right away because you need to talk to them when you have an accommodation. And what I tell students too is if you get your work in all the time and you show that you're a hardworking student and this one time you aren't able to get the work done, if you go to the professor who you've had a relationship with and say, look, I've worked really hard all semester. This one thing came up. I didn't get the work done. Can I have a few extra days? You're much more likely to get it because of the relationship. And the professor knows you're working hard. So you're absolutely right. And again, that's where the smaller colleges or the smaller classes come in because you can develop relationships. They get to know you, you get to know them. And it's much easier in a classroom when you can approach a professor than when you're in a class of 200
right.
And you don't really feel anything towards that professor. It's just a face at the front of the room.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. My undergrad, I went to Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois, and 90% of my classes had less than 30 students in it.
Right.
And that was like, I had only a couple lecture classes, and I felt a little kind of lost in those classes.
Yes, it's really difficult. What I tell students when they're thinking about large universities is I want you to physically go to the university and sit in on a class of 200 students for the entire 50 minutes or an hour and 15 minutes. And then say to yourself, honestly, can I learn this way? Because I know the sports are fun and everything else is fun. But if you can't learn, you're not going to make it past football season.
Right. No, and I think a small school can also be fun too. So it's
Oh, absolutely. That's what kids don't realize. When they say, I don't want a school as small as my high school, I remind them that their school is one building. They pass by the same students 4 years in a row. College could be 80 acres, and you would never know if it's 2,000 or 10,000 students based on walking on that campus. So why should the number matter to you? The class size is what matters.
Are there ever students that you work with who, based on sort of seeing their profile, you may suggest that, maybe traditional college isn't the right approach for you or the right avenue for you? All
the time. Yes.
Talk about that. Because, I think that there is this sort of, and I think a lot of this is honestly, it's sort of a white privilege, like thinking that like everyone's got to go to college. Right. And it's like, I don't think that college is for everyone. There's a lot of great sort of avenues for whether it's technical training or even entrepreneurship that don't require that traditional college degree. So how do you sort of want to assess that and to also help someone maybe even accept that?
Well, the acceptance takes a while. And what I like to do is plant seeds along the way as I'm working with a family to say, I'd like to consider some alternatives along with the colleges, just in case, college isn't the right path. I do some assessments with the students. And while we're doing assessments, it kind of gives us their strengths and also some areas of careers that they might like. So if it comes out technician, and all these different fields, I can say, you don't have to go for 4 years to be a technician in radiology or a vet tech. You can go for 1 year or 2 years and get a certificate and start working. And then if you want to go back later, you always can go back and finish. But some students love hearing that they don't have to go to college because they feel like they're supposed to. The other thing I suggest sometimes is that you're not ready for college. And maybe college is down the road in your future, but I'd like you to think about other options first. You could do an internship. You could work on a farm and do volunteer work. I mean, there's so many things you could do in your areas of interest. There are some students who just stay home and work for a year. But there are lots of alternative paths, even for students who need help with life skills who aren't ready to leave home. There are places they can go to get those skills and then go on to college. But I do tell people it's a myth that everybody goes to college right after high school and graduates in 4 years. That's just not the norm.
Yeah, it's not. It's what is the national average of people who have college degrees? It's like 37% or something around there.
Yeah. I'm not sure of that number. I do know that there is a statistic that sort of gives you a false impression of the 6-year graduation rate, but it only counts the students who start and finish at the same school. Mm. So if you went to community college and you transferred in, you're not in that statistic.
Oh, interesting.
So if you transferred out and graduated successfully at another college, you wouldn't be in that. So the average is 54% across the country of students who graduate from the same school they started in 6 years.
I know that some people who are in college for, 8 to 10 years, call them doctors. Others just are diagnosed with ADHD.
Right.
Often it is because of changing majors and maybe like dropping out, re-enrolling multiple times, specifically around the changing majors. Mm-hmm. Because there's the, I'm bored of this, I want something new, right? Or this is just, I'm hitting a hard patch right now. How do you sort of help students if they're thinking about, should I change majors? Is this the right thing for me? How do you help students evaluate that?
What I start with, unless I see clear indications of a major, like let's say a business major, the student's been an entrepreneur all his life. He's been selling computer parts on eBay. He's got a DJ business. He tells me he wants to go into business. I believe him. Somebody else comes to me and says, I think I want to go into acting. And I'll say, well, what have you acted in so far? Oh, nothing yet, but I'm interested.
I just like movies.
Right. So that student, I'm going to recommend a liberal arts college so they can get into theater, but they have other options when they change their mind, because we know they will. So it depends on the student. But I can see in some students, there's an engineer in that student who's been there all along. He's a Lego kid and he's, always building, always thinking, always solving problems. But there are other kids who, you just see it's not really where they should go. So I always want to recommend a school that has options where they can change.
For students with ADHD specifically, why do you think it is so important that students with ADHD are not going after degrees just for the money, and how that it is so incredibly important that they're actually interested in the field?
Well, because they're not going to succeed if they're going for the wrong reasons. If they're not interested, they're not going to get there. The reason we have so many ADHD entrepreneurs is because they follow their dreams where they want to take them, whether it's money or not money. Money can come along, but they're not doing it for the money. I know ADHD people who, the minute the business is successful, they sell it and start another business.
Yeah, those serial entrepreneurs, yeah. Because
they're bored. It's running itself. It doesn't need any challenge anymore. So, it's the love of learning, the love of the challenge of always being challenged in something you enjoy.
No, absolutely. So I was sort of thinking about because I know that for younger, kind of late teens, early 20s, there's still sometimes this sort of, sometimes it's enmeshment, sometimes it's just that they need to separate from parents, right, and make those choices for themselves. I know for some students that, it's like, oh, well, the family business, or like, this is what my parents expect me to do. And like really how it's so important to really have those hard conversations. Like, yes, maybe that was what your parents were hoping for, but it's not going to work, right? Like, they want you to go into the family accounting business, but like math has never been something that you excel at or you enjoy, right? Like, how do you guide students to have those conversations with their parents, even when they're young adults?
Well, that is a really good question, and it happens very often. What I try to tell them is to let their parents know that they have a different brain than the parent. An accountant is someone who doesn't sit around people, isn't around people, and sits at a desk. And the parents got to know that ADHD student is never going to sit behind a desk and work for 6 or 7 or 8 hours. They might be the salesperson. They might be the real estate person. So they've got to help them see that they're the kind of person that needs to be around people and needs to have something different every day. And when I'm working with a family, the assessments that I do and the interviews that I do point those things out to the parents, because I have the parents come in, even with older students, even in their 20s. I like the parents to come in so the parents can really understand their child or the young adult who they might not really understand. And to see from that perspective, I've often had artists come in and tell me they're going to be engineers because dad says that's what I need to be, or he has an engineering firm. And you see this beautiful artwork. And the student's clearly interested in going in a different direction. I have one student who's now a psychology major, and one parent was a business major, one parent, or a business person, one parent was a lawyer. And they each were pulling him in their direction. And I said to them both, what if he wants to go in another direction? Like, why does it have to be one of these two? And it didn't work. He tried it. Didn't work. So they finally agreed after several years of recognizing that he just kept failing. So it's challenging.
So I have one more question. And this is the question that I wasn't going to ask, but I was sort of thinking about, like, when I am on like social media and in different sort of like Facebook groups, this is one of the most frequent questions that I hear or see people asking, especially if they're maybe new to ADHD. What's the best field of study for someone with ADHD to go into?
I would say the best field is the way to find the best field is to look at what you've been doing all your life that you love doing. If you love trading baseball cards, or you loved selling candy or lemonade at the stand when you were little, that's what you should do. Go into that. If you're a Lego kid and I say that if you're a Lego kid that follows the book, then you're an engineer. And if you're a Lego kid who just creates, you're an architect. So look at your whole history and see what you love doing and just do that. I don't think there is one field. I know there are fields you shouldn't do.
Like what?
Well, like anything that makes you sit at a desk. You have to be around people or computers. You have to be around something that is not routine. It has to be different every day. You have to have changed routines, not the same old, same old. You got to always have a challenge. So I think you could do that in any field.
Yeah, because I'm a believer that we don't have the luxury to do something that we don't love doing. Like, it's a necessity, right? It's part of the way we have to accommodate our brains. And if we want to, have a life that we, by, most measures, can say that we were pretty successful at, loving what you do can't be optional.
That's right. It has to be. And if I could say one more thing, that I tell students in high school that when they're in college, they can take the courses that interest them, and they can take those courses and do anything they want with them. You could take a course in economics because you love it, but you don't have to be an economics major. And then you could take a course in art history because that sounds interesting. And after a while, you'll create a major by the number of courses you take in a certain area. But just follow what you love to do.
Judy Bass, the website is basseducationalservices.com. Any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, ADHD people are amazingly creative, entrepreneurial thinkers, and they're fun to be around.
Awesome. If you are interested in working with Judy, go check out the website. Again, it's Bass Educational Services. We will post a link to that on this episode's show notes. Judy, thank you so much. I appreciate this.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD reWired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is ADHDrewired.com. You can find time-stamped summaries and additional resources for each episode. Apply to join our free and secret Facebook community. Learn more about our award-winning intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. Join the Adult Study Hall virtual co-working membership community. Find all the other podcasts on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. Sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content that you won't hear anywhere else. And use the search tool to find episodes on specific topics. You can do all of this at ADHDrewired.com. While you're there, click on the Patreon button. If you are a regular listener, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to you, the listener, but it's not free to produce. Plus, patrons get cool perks like ad-free episodes and access to recordings of coaching calls, and $25 a month patrons can join me once a month for a group coaching call. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD rewired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. Subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube to see selective interviews and other videos I've made. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends, family, your therapists, your coaches, doctors, siblings, parents. And if you, your coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at the website, ADHDrewired.com. If you are a member of CHAD, ADA, or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this show and all the shows on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. And if you really loved this particular episode, please hit share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I do count on you to help spread this message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other app that supports reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at Audible by going to audibletrial.com/ADHD rewired. Here is my list of must-listen-to audiobooks updated July 2021. Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Attached by Amir Levin and Rachel Heller. Atomic Habits by James Clear, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni, Crucial Conversations by Carrie Patterson, The Coaching Habit by Michael Stainer, The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, Rest by Alex Sujong Kim Peng, The 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins, Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning by Peter Brown, The Productivity Project by Chris Bailey, Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics by Dan Harris, Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. I always recommend to my coaches and admin that they read that book. The One Thing by Gary Keller, a required reading for all of our coaching group members. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Vaden, The 4 Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin, The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. And if you're looking for something a little bit more magical, I have fallen in love with the Harry Potter series, and the narrator, Jim Dale, is amazing. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus, all of her stuff is great. starting with Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, and the Power of Vulnerability. And if you're an entrepreneur or leader, be sure to check out her book, Dare to Lead. Do you have something that you would like to share? Click on the podcast tab at ADHD Rewired, click the button to be a guest at the top of the page, and schedule a 15-minute interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, growing, and connecting. Self-care is not selfish. No matter what you get done or don't get done, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. And we don't need to do them in the hardest way possible. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.